Joining us, MS Now senior political and national reporter Jacob Soboroff, New York Times opinion columnist David French, former ICE director Sarah Saldana, and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree. David, it's part of that don't believe what your eyes are, what you're seeing with your eyes nature of this that the Democrats really want to seize on to.
Yeah, I think one of the key things to realize here is that we're in an information world where an awful lot of Americans have not seen this footage. They've just not. I mean, there was a recent Pew Center study showing how different Americans are based on where they get their news and how red America gets its news from places that blue America never frequents and vice versa. So the Democrats have a real problem right now in trying to reach persuadable people who might have had a lot of sympathies for tougher immigration restrictions, tougher border enforcement, but they don't like these tactics. And one of the problems they have is exposing America to these tactics. Those of us who pay close attention to the news are very, very familiar with it, but lots of Americans are not. And this hearing is obviously one effort to do that, but it's only one very small piece of a very big pie of trying to dispel disinformation the Trump administration is putting out, that all of this going on are a bunch of lawful arrests being disrupted by violent agitators, when the actual tale of the tape, when it gets to the public, tells something very different. And the problem is, outside of some of these horrific shooting videos, the pervasive sense of brutality that you see, while it's leaking into the public, some they're beginning to sour on it. I still don't think people understand the full extent of it.
So Rep. Garcia, who you're seeing right now, is making his opening statement at this forum. It's him and Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut that are hosting it. And Garcia is arguing that the Trump administration's extreme policies, these are his words, the violent tactics and the culture of impunity are what led to the deaths of Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good in Minnesota. He's undermining that the administration claims that Preddy and Good were domestic terrorists. He's also claiming that the evidence suggests a cover-up by the administration by impeding impartial investigation. Sarah, what is your reaction to those claims from Garcia?
Well, they're going to have to be demonstrated and shown to the American public. I think there's a lot of legitimate basis for what he is suggesting. One of the most disturbing things for me as the former director of ICE, an agency, and I trust I don't offend too many of your viewers, who has an important mission and has done important work across the world, actually, continues to have that mission. It is a statutory mission. And what the administration has done through its Department of Homeland Security secretary, its representatives from ICE, from the highest levels of the administration, is undermined the agency that never has been the most popular agency there is in the federal government, but at least it had its legitimacy in what it was doing. When I was there, we managed to remove 500,000 people who were in the country without authorization, without killing a single American citizen. It can be done. And it is just tragic that now even the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the agency within it, ICE, Border Patrol, quite frankly, and CBP, all have been tainted by these gross misrepresentations that have happened. It is so important to have full blown investigations of both of these, particularly the killings, and for the American public to weigh in and give its views. I think it's going to be pretty much a good part of the American public is going to say this is not acceptable.
So, Tom, you and I have gone back and forth on the investigations. Do you still, or do you think the administration is doing enough to look into these deaths, especially considering public reaction toward ICE and the lack of confidence the public largely has in that agency now, not always, now?
Well, I think the Deputy Attorney General took a very significant and important step when he announced that they would be conducting a civil rights investigation into the death of Mr. Priddy. I think that was absolutely the right thing to do. I do think they could be doing more on the investigatory front with regard to Ms. Good. They're not doing a lot on that. They could and should be doing more. But I also agree with the point that your prior guest made, which is to say ICE is a law enforcement agency that serves a very important purpose. We can't have a secure border without having an agency like ICE enforce the laws of the United States. Is there room for improvement, to say the least? Absolutely, yes. I agree that we should and could and should be able to remove illegal, particularly violent people here who are here illegally or have criminal convictions without harming American citizens, people who are protesting, people who are raising valid concerns about the use of excessive force. We should be able to do both. We should be able to execute and enforce the laws of the United States, but do so in a way that respects people who may dissent or urge caution on ICE's operations.
So that tension is interesting, Jacob. You've been covering immigration for us for years now. How much of that tension do you encounter among the public that you speak to? Do you talk to people who feel like there is room for both, that there's room for an agency like ICE or ICE itself to do immigration enforcement, maybe the way that the Obama administration did it, but that they don't agree with the tactics now? Is there a acknowledgement that there is a need for immigration enforcement in this country?
It depends on what the policies and procedures and tactics and operations of ICE are. There were many people who were very critical of Immigration and Customs Enforcement during the first Obama administration. It's why he was given that nickname, the Deporter-in-Chief. And many people didn't want to see them going after people who had nothing other than civil immigration violations coming into this country. People wanted to see an approach more similar to Ronald Reagan that allowed people to stay in the country who had been here for a particular amount of time, who had met certain criteria, were contributing to society. But many of those same people that I talk to on the streets do understand particular parts of ICE and the value that they do bring to American law enforcement, specifically Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, within ICE, which has long been in conflict with the enforcement and removal operation part of the agency. HSI normally is looking at things like human trafficking, drug trafficking, sex trafficking. And those agents, in some cases, have been detailed to these interior enforcement removal operations of not, again, let me remind everybody, not the worst of the worst, but of everyday people going about quotidian activities who have nothing other than a civil immigration violation under their belt. And if you look at Julia Ainsley, our former colleagues reporting over at NBC today, she has cited evidence that Greg Movino was looking to go after people indiscriminately and not in targeted enforcement operations like they have been saying they're doing all along, which is why I think, Katie, it's so important the ranking member Garcia of the Oversight Committee is chairing this meeting today. He was the mayor of Long Beach before he was the ranking member on the Oversight Committee here in Southern California. He and his constituents were subjected to, witnessed up close, the very beginnings of these policies from the earliest days of this administration. When I talked to Tom Homan in a loading dock in Long Beach, California, when he said to me on the second day of the operations in L.A., people are going to die, it was in Robert Garcia's district. So the man you're seeing on the left-hand side of your screen right now has very practical, real experience on the ground with what these enforcement operations mean and what the very people you asked me about are saying about how they affect the communities that he serves.
We just saw an image of Renee Nicole Good's brothers. Again, they're going to be testifying at this hearing, and we're going to go in there once they begin. David, the images of Renee Nicole Good and the images of Alex Priddy did get absorbed by the majority of the country. Priddy specifically because most of the country was inside during a snow or ice event, and it was a captive audience in a way that the country normally is not. But they did go quite viral and did get absorbed by the population. Does testimony like this, if it's about something that most people now know about, does this break through as well?
Well, it's going to take a lot more than this. I mean, it's part of it. I think that if you look at what happened in both of these horrific killings in Minneapolis, it broke the door open to where a lot of people's minds are now more open to the idea that what's happening is abusive. And I think it's very, very, very important for Democrats, for people who are trying to hold the Trump administration accountable, that do not attach extremist messages about no deportations or no real border enforcement. Do not attach those kinds of messages to this. What we're talking about is an administration that is not just going after the worst of the worst, as it had broadcast. It's actually sometimes going after people who've done everything right, who are actually lawfully in the country. It's bringing citizens in. And it's, as we've said many times, it's bringing in people who've been contributing parts of the American economy and society for year after year after year, including their kids. And they're doing so through military-style tactics like their wannabe SEAL Team 6. And so what Democrats need to do is to go after these tactics, go after this approach. Don't go after border laws or border restrictions. Don't go after the idea that we need to have immigration enforcement. Go after these tactics. That's what's so brutal. It's sweeping in innocent people. It's brutalizing innocent people. And it's covering us in national shame. We haven't even talked about the conditions in some of these detention facilities for which we don't have good video yet. But when that comes, our kids will say to us, how did you let this moment happen?